hopefully we can use this opportunity to build a new dApp, essentially, in collaboration with the community. So as we move into the next phase of the project, we're going to be, instead of the kind of launch team building the core development in isolation, more and more of the development activity is going to be involved with the DAO, more governance related proposal systems, all that sort of stuff. And we can take our time on it, but I think what we're looking for is a app that has product market fit because it's made by the market with us. And I think there was a huge amount of potential in markets. It feels a little strange, because although I think DAOs will want prediction markets, no one quite understands why at this point. But I think the madness will become realizable and understandable at some point in the future when we start getting into futarchy and things like that. And we need a new system that will allow us to do that kind of prediction market based governance stuff, and it'll be predominantly around asset management. So yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting session. It's just a few hours to start with, which is absolutely fine. We should have this recorded now, so people will be able to come back and understand where our heads are at with Markets 2.0 and how to get involved. So yeah, any thoughts, comments on markets before we start? All right.
Maybe we should share like a link in general to the app.
The link to the app? Yeah?
Yeah, in general, yeah.
Let's do that. All right. I'm going to share my screen, go through a document that I've been working on. Can you see my CryptPad document at the top left now? All right, so I'm going to fill this out as we're talking and based on ideas and feedback. But essentially, markets.vote, which is our prediction market application. There's a few interesting things about this. I'll give you a bit of a background on why we started with this. In summer 2020, there were a few things that were hot in the market at that time. One was DeFi, obviously, it was DeFi summer. And the other was the potential of prediction markets. And I think the main reason why there was a lot of interest in prediction markets at that time was down to the American elections that were happening, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and Augur. Essentially, the promise of prediction markets had been talked around for a long time. There was a paper written by a guy called Robin Hand called "We Will Vote on Values and Bet on Beliefs," and it was the idea of futarchy. And futarchy is the idea that you could use prediction markets to meet with governance. So we would say, okay, let's make this governance decision. If we make this governance decision, will it lead to a better positive outcome? And we would get people to bet on, yes, things are better or things are worse. And the idea is that you would pick the market sentiment up out of this prediction market, and you would see if the perceived value of those decisions were what the market wanted. And the idea is that the market would act as a kind of oracle into the future. For example, if someone said, okay, let's reduce income tax rates to 2%. Do we think this is good for the country? Let's have a prediction market on the GDP of the country in 5 years' time. And then people would bet on essentially over/under GDP in 5 years' time. And you would use that data to inform whether to do the decision in the first place. And essentially the idea is that the market would end up making the decisions. And it's a way to essentially decentralize our governance decisions. Very sort of wacky idea, really. But I've been thinking about it for quite a long time. It is a way to decentralize governance which is very much what we're about. But yeah, it's a kind of long way off, and what we're building here is the kind of infrastructure for that. It was my view that there was a few failings in the prediction market space. If we have a look at Augur, let's have a look at it. They've gone into sports books now. I have no idea what Augur Turbo is. We've been cancelled. Augur. That's interesting. So a decentralized product, we can't use it. That's great. That might mean this is illegal in the UK for some reason. This is fun to find out. But the issues with Augur were that essentially liquidity was always really thin. So people would set up like, who's going to be, or is this person going to be the top NBA player of the year in 2020 or something like that. Now you need sufficient amount of players betting real money to create a liquid enough market for the predictions to be anything meaningful. And around the time of the elections, we had our first real liquid prediction market, and it drove a huge amount of attention to the prediction market space. So that was one of the issues. Liquidity was always a massive problem in prediction markets. And the other is it kind of reduces all decisions down to the player of the year thing is a good example. You would like, is this one basketball player going to win or not? Yes or no? When in fact, what you need is a market that allows you to select one of many players rather than just yes or no, over, under. So another common prediction market, is Bitcoin going to be above $50,000 after August this year or something like that? And that allows you to settle the market because it's a thing that you can test with real data to settle the market. So markets.vote was an attempt to introduce a new dynamic into prediction markets. One is this idea of pooled liquidity, so protocol generated liquidity for prediction markets. So rather than requiring counterparties to a trade, so if you're buying Trump yes tokens from someone, you need to be sold them by someone who wants the other side of the market. I want to sell my Trump yes token for this price. And there's never been enough liquidity in that market to facilitate that. So what we did was create a pool of liquidity generated by network tokens. That means there's always a liquid market. There's always a return on the bet, if you like. And the other is that we use quadratic voting to allow multiple universes to be put into play. So you can think of probabilities as there is 10 possible universes at the end of on the 25th of the 10th, and in one of them everything's got wrecked and DAI is the top trading token because everything's gone negative. There's a universe where Uniswap is the top traded token by percentage change. And what this is allows users to delegate their preference or insight on which one they think is most likely. And on the back of this, the users who voted on these tokens would take a share of the pooled liquidity based on the amount of votes. So essentially, last week we effectively predicted the winner a week in advance of the time. The projected winner by consensus, which is the blue lines here, and the number of votes, was Bitcoin, and the market winner, which we have detected from a Chainlink oracle, was in fact wrapped Bitcoin. So what we're doing here is detecting the change in price over a 7-day period, which gives you Bitcoin was up 12.65%. Therefore, it was the top gainer. That then gets settled, and you can see on previous ones, Bitcoin, the one in the sort of box here, was the biggest gainer. And the projected gainer in this case was Chainlink and was wrong. So everyone in this case who had votes on Bitcoin shares the pot. So somewhere in the back end, there's a pot of 100,000 tokens that are shared by everyone who voted on Bitcoin. So if someone had 10 votes... sorry, there's someone? Stick on mute, whoever you are. So if someone had 10 votes on wrapped Bitcoin, they would get 10% of the pot, 10,000 FET. And people have been doing this for... Did someone mute whoever that is? Who left their microphone on unintentionally? So yeah, this has been working. What we don't really know is if the projections, so there was a few sort of like ideas here. Okay, we've got a new prediction market design, which is interesting in itself. We may have solved this liquidity problem, which requires essentially an order book So Augur uses an order book, a bit like a centralized exchange does, in order to match bids. We use this, like essentially it's like a pari-mutuel bet, it's called, where you've got like a pot of money, a pot of bets that gets shared between the winners. You don't have fixed odds as such, but what you don't need then is order books. It's a bit like the switch from order books to AMMs. So it's an AMM-like solution to prediction markets, which is super interesting. The idea being that if enough people played this, we might actually generate market alpha. So the collective intelligence of pooled voters gives you some insight on the future of the market that you wouldn't have without it. Now, I don't know if we ever achieve that, because we've only very recently, and we've just cracked it this week, to be able to pull down the data from all the historic ballots to see if they would. For example, you could consider this like a basket of tokens, 10 tokens. If you imagine buying $100 each of them, so you're investing $1,000 each week, and you're putting $100 in each of these tokens, would the trade of doing it on these weightings be superior to betting just $100 each? So this one you would have, say, you'd be betting, I don't know, $125 instead of $100 on these things, or you'd be betting 40% more. Now it looks like that might be the case on this one, but I think that's one of the outstanding things we need to find out. How many of the weeks over time have outperformed the market based on the vote weighting than if you would just bet them flat? So over 50 weeks, if it was totally random, you would expect to be right about 5 times over the whole year. And I think we've been right more than that. I certainly remember at least 5 of them. So if you would expect a totally random roll, that if you just picked one of these at random to win every week, you would expect to hit it 10% of the time. So one of the jobs we've got now is to figure out what to do next, is to figure out if there's actually any alpha in this at all. I suspect there might, but it is somewhat random. So you can imagine a index that was weighted by votes each week, and you traded in and out of these tokens based on the projected winner. Would you have done better doing that, or buying that index, than just buying each of them individually? People follow me so far? Does that make sense?
Yep, gotcha.
Nice. Okay. The other dimension to this is we've got our identity system. And one of the kind of novel things that we did here was, because we're using quadratic voting, it gets broken. Everyone can set up separate accounts super easily. And what this system does is add a financial barrier to entry to setting up a new account. And in fact, if someone comes along and decides to basically come and brute force the system, then the price of these goes exponential over time. So again, I thought this was quite innovative, because we essentially used NFT gating on a dApp, and I don't think that had been done before this, and I still think this is probably the only dApp that does this at the moment. So there's something pretty interesting here, but there's a few issues that I can see. One is we introduced a reputation dynamic, which was the amount of voice credits that was, it starts at 100, and then the more right you are, the more voice credits that you get over time. You can see my identity's been detected here, and I've got, because I voted for 25 weeks in a row, I aggregated 1,470 V, which means instead, if I did this on a starting identity, I would have used all my voice credits up. But you can see the maximum I can vote is 39. So this is like so yeah, I can vote 38 times on this one token. But it's only 3 times more than 10. But what I can do now is start splitting my votes across multiple things. And this is what's happened, is that people have aggregated large amounts of reputation and started just arbitrarily hedging across all the tokens. So I haven't voted for about 10 or 15 weeks, but I still have the reputation that I had then. So there's some nuance required on the reputation system here. But again, I think this is one of the first decentralized reputation systems that has been developed. So there's something else that's novel there. And in theory, the idea is that the voting power drifts towards those who are more correct over time, thus filtering out the people who are wrong on the market, but giving more voting power to people who are right on the market. But the problem was it just reinforced the people who were, what it did was give the voting power to people who voted the longest, not necessarily the most accurate. So I think Markets 2.0 needs that reputation system. I'll let you read this through at a later date, but the kind of aims that I think for the new app are that there's a few issues with it. One is that there's what I'm calling the nothing at stake problem. Now, this dApp was essentially free to use. Once you'd bought an identity, you can vote every week without having to stake any FVT or put any other money in other than the gas that it takes to vote. Now, on Ethereum, it turned out that was quite a substantial amount of money anyway. When we first made this application, it cost about $5 to vote on the vote markets because gas was low. And now gas is super expensive. So it now costs like $100 to vote on the Ethereum chain. And even so, people still did it because it still made rational sense to play the game for the reward on the other side, even though it was expensive to do. One of the data things I'm interested in seeing is people who voted consistently, what was their ROI against the gas that they voted on? Then we went to a new chain. We opened the thing up on Binance Smart Chain. It worked for 3 weeks or thereabouts and then broke because Binance Smart Chain you can't get events from historic chain data. So essentially Binance Smart Chain is a fork of Ethereum with a more centralized consensus mechanism, and they've essentially just turned all the parameters up. Bigger blocks, smaller block times, and they hadn't fundamentally changed the architecture of the system to cope with this new load. And consequently, the archive nodes just don't work. No one's managed to get one worked. We've tried literally every single node provider in the entire space. Many of them told us that we've got this, and led us down a kind of dead end. We tried them all. UV wasted like hundreds of hours on this, and it was super frustrating, and we never managed to get BSC to work. So that was like the issue with moving it to a new EVM chain. And what became evident on BSC was that without the gas limitation, it became very easy and low cost to essentially mint lots of new identities and then spam the vote markets with votes. And there's some evidence that there are people using bots to vote 50 times on 50 identities across it, and it'll cost them like maybe $5-10, and they might get like $100 worth of tokens back, or 200. And there's a few people doing this, and essentially it's trended into this kind of like script bot war in the back end, or someone who's just willing to really spam votes into the system. We've got this issue of a nothing at stake problem. This is classic crypto economic issue, which is where proof of stake systems supposedly resolve this, and proof of work certainly does, because the hardware, you need to commit hashing power to mining blocks, and if you have to put input into the system. If there's no input into the system, then it becomes easily Sybil attackable, if you like. It becomes easy to start to grief the system. So I think we've got some elements of that. I think the Ethereum gas price has slowed that down on the Ethereum chain. So I'm certainly interested in seeing how the two different markets played out. So we'll get an insight into how the nothing at stake problem has manifested that. I think in the new iteration, we can actually take out our dependency on events. So we might even be able to get it to work on Binance, because we can just essentially not use events to find out who owns what IDs in the past. And once we do that, we can take it to Polygon and we can take it to all these other chains relatively. The other sort of idea is that we originally conceptualized this as a way to curate the crypto space. We've got a list of 10 tokens here now, and these were the hot tokens at the time. DeFi tokens, Compound, UMA, Synthetics, Ren, Maker, Uniswap, YFI, all of these things it was all hot DeFi tokens at the time. People's DeFi now because everyone's just enjoying flipping JPEGs around. But the idea is that we could add in new tokens to this list over time. So we initially thought we might do a top 21 token. There would be a debate around what new token should go in the basket each week. So users suggest a token. I think we should do this. We run a what token next vote. People say, I think SushiSwap could go in for these reasons. And then if SushiSwap came top token, it would be added to the vote market. So why is that interesting? Because there's something like 50,000 to 100,000 tokens a year now. Most of them are rug pulls. There's 4,000 rugs a day on Binance Smart Chain, for example. So in permissionless systems, if anyone can make a token, most of them are shit. So the idea here is that we have this consistently voted system which curates. Someone asking a question, or is that just random background noise?
Random background noise.
Random background noise. So yeah, that's this idea that you essentially could create what are the best tokens on all chains. So now we've not just got thousands of tokens a year on Ethereum, on new ERC20 tokens, we've got thousands of tokens, hundreds of thousands of tokens a year on BSC, and hundreds of thousands of tokens on Avalanche, and hundreds of thousands of tokens on Polygon. And this is only going to keep going. There's just going to be more and more noise, more and more tokens, more and more just outright scams, outright nonsense, noise. Because that's the inevitable end game of permissionless systems. Anyone can release a token trivially, certainly on the low-cost chains. So what you need is a filtering mechanism. Now, who does the filtering? So you could say the market does the filtering, and that's what happens on CoinGecko. The top thousands and thousands of tokens are just sorted by their market cap. But market cap as a statistic can be very heavily manipulated. So you could have a billion tokens, but release 10,000 of them, manipulate them to a high price, and then your fully diluted valuation is in the billions. But actually, you've only got a very small amount of market action on a small amount of tokens. So what you actually need is a group of people saying, we think these are the best tokens on this chain. And that's where I imagine this could go. That we find the signal in the noise of all of these shitcoins everywhere and find the best one of them on each chain. So we go to Solana, we go to Polkadot, we just essentially replicate this system everywhere. And what you would come to on the markets.vote website is here's like the top 10 tokens or the top 20 tokens for all of the chains in the space. And essentially it becomes a kind of competitor to CoinGecko at that point. And you'd see the trending tokens, and not just that, you'd see the discussion on the trending tokens and why people thought they were. And all of that creates a kind of market input. So that was the idea. It links with our influence system to feed into markets, and I think we can do that. My idea was that the reputation system, which is this kind of like only system which just doubles week in, week out based on if you've bet 36 voice credits on and with six votes, spending 36 voice credits, and you were right, you would get 36 more voice credits the week after. This was a nice, simple starting point for that reputation system. Where I'd like it to go is that people can spin up their own vote markets. So someone can say, okay, I'm going to spend, maybe I'll burn 100,000 FET to set up a new vote market. So I'm going to set up Nick's vote market. And here's my choice of top 10 tokens. And then I get my mates to come and my followers to come and vote on my token. And I might try and influence them to say, which one do you think's good this week? And so on. And then you get a kind of user-generated buckets of tokens that we could almost league table against each other. So if Matt has a vote market and I have a vote market, who picked the best 10 tokens and who's got the followers who can predict the market best? And we have a kind of league table system against each other. So yeah, that's the kind of suggestions that I have, is that we need to scale to new chains. We started it with BSC, but it was reliant on events. So we need to remove reliance on events in the smart contract, which requires a rebuilding of the smart contract in order to do that. This nothing at stake problem is an issue on the low fee chains, and it costs us 100,000 FET a week to prime these markets for people to play them. And although people are enjoying farming for, it's not good for the network. It's an unnecessary inflation to the network. So what we propose here is that it now becomes like a staking game, where you might bet 1,000 FET on your bet, and if your bet is right, the share of the pot is weighted by how many tokens you staked on it. So let's say we have 1,000 players who all put 1,000 FET bets in. We've now got 1 million FET in the pot. That would share evenly, but if someone's come in and put 10,000 FET in, they would get 10x share compared to the other one. And I think we can do that. UV has a first iteration of that staking mechanism. And what that means is that there'll be a big pot of T that gets shared out. We aren't providing it, the market participants are. And the idea was, and this is proposed in the white paper, that 10% of that pot gets burnt every week as a kind of network fee. And what happens is the losers pay the winners. So if you don't have any votes on the winning tokens, then you lose your tokens, you don't get any back. But if you do have winning ones on, you're taking those tokens from the losers. So that's the idea so far. Has anyone got any thoughts, reflections, ideas on where that can go?
I have a question with regards to...
Go on, Matt.
Sorry, Chris.
No, go.
Cool. Just quick on. Question with regards to, like you said, the nothing at stake side of things and how proof of work fixes that in many ways. With the change in Ethereum going to EIP, whatever it's called, can't remember, London, and you've got, and then on the other side you've got, say, Bitcoin, which obviously doesn't change that much, but clearly the nothing at stake problem has been solved there. Does moving to Bitcoin then as the next chain make sense, or does it make sense to utilize the staking functionality of Ethereum and how that could work?
So I think there's a few different things going on. There's the nothing at stake problem is essentially, it's resolved by proof of work because you need the hardware and you need the hashing power in order to mine, in order to contribute to consensus. Ethereum 2.0 is to move to a proof of stake system. What you're actually doing is staking your Ethereum assets on it. And if you lie about the validity of a block, then you lose, your stake gets slashed. So that's what's at stake there. So these are base chains, and essentially in this game, there isn't much reliance on the consensus mechanism of the base chain. We don't care as long as we can commit data to the chain. So which chain we use is actually as long as there's integrity of the block system in it. So it doesn't really matter which chain we use as long as it has consensus integrity. What we need is a system where you can't just for free play this game and claim the pot every week. So the nothing at stake problem as it's manifested here is that ID, you can bet every week on one of the low fee chains and it costs you nothing and you're getting free FE. And because you have nothing at stake, you don't care what you're voting on. Like, you're not putting any consideration in on what you're voting. So what people are doing is just mindless doing dumb votes and voting 5 on everything. And Lizzle's done some really nice work on this where you can see the patterns in people's voting, and everyone's just trended to hedging across all the tokens. No one's actually looking at the market. Oh, I think Chainlink's going to perform better than Bitcoin this year and so on, this week. So the nothing at stake is that people aren't risking anything and consequently aren't thinking. So it's a separate issue. The kind of consensus of the chain is something that is important and is a different crypto economic problem, but we don't care about it. Does that
So-
make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Thanks.
Do I understand correctly, for the staking, there would be two options? To even participate, you have to stake a certain amount of FVT to be able to vote. And then also, if you wanted to, you could delegate your votes and put your stake on someone else who maybe, knows a bit more about the market than you. Is that kind of the idea?
That was, so there's quite a lot of elaboration on this in the original white paper, actually. I imagined where this could go is that you imagine, let's say there's like ID 1000 who is just really good at predicting. You can look at ID 1000, see that they're predicting the market week in, week out better than anyone else. What you could do is stake your tokens on their ID and bet on their performance. And this is a kind of social trading dynamic, like a copy trading system. That's absolutely where I'd like it to go, that you are, instead of making your own bets on the market, I don't know how to predict the market. But I do like this guy who seems to understand the market. What I'm going to do is bet on him, which is a kind of delegation like. So that was in the original design, yeah. That's something we could consider integrating into Markets 2.0. It might even be Markets 3.0. I know, but that's where I'd like it to go, yeah.
I was just thinking about that reputation thing rather than the nothing at stake thing. I was just like, obviously, with the actual IDs and the fact that I wonder whether there was like a sort of decaying system you could do where you start with 100 reputation points and that is the base level and never go lower than that. And if you're correct the following week, you get a chunk added to that, and either it decays at a steady rate, or if one week you don't vote, it will go down a sort of, let's say it goes down 0.5, but if you vote one week and you're wrong, it goes down slightly more. And if you vote a week and you're right, it will go up slightly more until you have you're compelling users to vote and to take part to stop their reputation ticking down further, but you're also incentivizing them to be right. But I didn't know whether that was something we'd considered or might work.
That would be
Yeah.
called the demurrage reputation, actually, right?
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's an idea. So there's one of the ideas on reputation system is exactly that. There's, what was it called, Ksenia? Demurrage. I hadn't heard it called that, but I'd heard this idea of decaying.
There is a demurrage currency, right? And it comes from this demurrage that you pay when you put your ship somewhere and then you have to pay a rent or something. But it's pretty much a currency that loses value over time to promote people transacting. It's called the demurrage currency. But
Yeah,
I haven't heard about demurrage reputation yet.
Yeah,
That's
now,
what I would call it.
so yeah, I've considered the decay thing in the past. The difficulty is like, how much does it decay by, and over what time? And so it should go down. So at the moment, it only goes up, and that means, so basically, I accrued 1,500 V on my account, but I haven't voted for 20 weeks. Should it just decay by 100 a week that I don't vote, for example?
Mm-hmm.
I think it should probably decay. So there's actually an idea from learning theory, I forget which theorist it is, but they're called forgetting curves. So if you plot someone's understanding of something over time and you don't go back to that subject, their knowledge of that thing decays.
Mm-hmm.
They're called forgetting curves. And I think we could probably do that. Let's give you an idea of what that looks like. Yeah. Curve of forgetting, sometimes called. Ebbinghouse's forgetting curves. That's it. So people debated what the line shape curves are, right? But something like a decaying curve, it's like a bonding curve on the reputation is certainly a good idea. I think we should definitely explore that. But what I suggested here is that we have a framework for modifying it. So someone can say, all right, I'm going to try a decay system on this that looks like this. It uses, I don't know, this curve, for example. And then someone else could set up a vote market with a different. So actually the reputation system becomes a kind of like placeholder for people to try out different reputation systems.
Got you. Yeah.
Which would be great. Now there is some doing what you can do in Solidity is the limiter on a lot of this stuff. So you have to make sure that you're not trying to do something that is fundamentally impossible. But yeah, I think the forgetting thing is definitely, I think that could be done in Solidity with relative ease.
I considered nothing impossible in Solidity with UV.
Yeah, it's like
work it out.
if anyone can do it, it's going to be UV. But yeah, and I think it shouldn't be just like it should be based on incorrectness as well.
Yeah.
So this dumb voting activity, which is essentially someone coming in, voting 10 on everything without looking at the market, we need to penalize that. So every time you get it like wrong, there should be some kind of like reduction in the reputation you get for being wrong as well as being right.
Yeah, they use similar things like surprise. I'm gonna give you an analogy of a video game, Nick. But like, for example, in this competitive playlist on a particular game, you'll be rewarded for hitting, say, 5,000, which is the maximum you can reach in a season. And obviously, when you play and you win, you'll get, I don't know, 50 points towards that. And then if you lose a game, you lose, say, 25 points. And then every week that you don't play, there's a middle ground of your reputation in that playlist decays just because you haven't taken part, which is to incentivize people to populate the playlist and always find matches, etc., etc. But then obviously what they do on top of that, which is quite interesting, and again, it could be something we could explore, is like streaks. You're correct 3 weeks in a row. You might see an impact in a positive way in terms of that third week you might get 75 points towards your thing. But and equally, if you're constantly wrong, losing streaks are always, I think, slightly more dangerous because it can put people off being involved completely. If you're just constantly getting it wrong, you just don't want to go. But if we've always got a base of 100, it feels like that's less of an issue, and maybe that's a way of, again, incentivizing people to take part and put a bit more thought into being correct without having to worry too much about the pot. Take care of that aspect too, right?
Yeah, and this was the thing I was looking for. I'm not sure this actually works in reality. I think it's meant to be on learning theory, which is if I'm learning calculus, if I do one lesson on it and then it goes to zero over time unless I keep doing it again, there's like a remembering curve, which is the opposite one. So I think that dynamic that you're talking about, we could do something like where, okay, you've got one, well done, could have been chance, so it decays quickly. But if you get it right again, then you go back to where you were before very quickly. And in fact, the more times you get it, the decay rate at which you lose your reputation slows down.
Oh yeah, that's good.
So it's like, all right, the chances of you just randomly are getting lower each time because you keep getting it. So the chances of you being wrong, and it might be, so this curve, you can imagine this being 100, and we could go, instead of everyone ending up with 1,000, which means, so this was the other issue. We've got users now with 3,000 V, right? Which means they've got 30 times the voting power to a new user. So the earlier the players are, the more of an outsized win that they have, outside power against the new user. So it's really disincentivizing because there's that guy over there that's got so much more voting power than me.
Yeah. See, the way they get around that in video game land is they will say every 3 months the season resets, and if you've hit, which again I can imagine for a lot of people what am I trying to word? What's the word? Demotivate them to take part because they're like, well, I built up all this, now you've taken it away. But what you could do is reward a certain percentile of people who got to that level with something like the equivalent of a POAP or whatever it is that says, I was successful this month, I get X as a result, and that will always be displayed, or I'll always have that, and then I'm back to 100. Can I do it again this season, in air quotes?
Yes. Now, you reminded me yesterday that we have actually this rank system already built into the contract, where what we could do is say cream off the top 20 players and put them in their own vote market against each other.
Yeah.
And that's already in the contracts, actually, which is another thing we can do. We can have different rank games where the pros play each other and they go into a different league table, if you like.
Yeah, I was gonna say I feel like there's potentially a social element to the reputation system as well. Depending on how many people put their stake on you, it increases or decreases your reputation. Or maybe haven't participated in the system at all, but people know that you're a trader and you're good at it and you come into the system and people decide that you should have X amount of reputation to start off with.
Yes, and again, we did think about this. See, this identity that referred you is another functionality here that we never used, and this allows us to do decentralized referrals, which means that, let's say there's a big trader who mints ID 1210 or something, and everyone who then comes and mints an identity 210 in here are then linked to that ID. FET wants 643 here, so let's, for the sake of it, say 121 sets up a vote market. Hey guys, come and join my vote market. Then this ID essentially becomes bonded to this one. And then there's like a popularity contest almost, the person who's got the most followers, and then that could build into their how much vote or something like that. But yeah, there's a whole mechanic here. So what we could do, for example, on the staking game, so let's say million T ends up in the pot with everyone's bets, 10% gets burned as fees, and it might be 10% goes to the referred identity. So this guy's just like made 100 T that because he's generated a pot for people playing it. It's deflationary because there's a burn mechanic. And then this guy's getting a kickback because he's recruited all these people that have put 1 million FET in the pot.
Yeah. What I like about that ranking system is you can then reflect that. You could reflect it here in the Discord. You could have a special role for people in the Premier League, as it were, and they get to sort of want that on their badge. It sort of ties in everywhere.
Yeah, so we could have a section, for people with over X reputation on their identity, for example.
Sharing their alpha.
Yeah, so these are the kind of pro vote market people or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's just a huge amount of potential with this. And I think it's an interesting game. It's actually, again, we're ahead of the market. This is a play to earn game, right? If you think about it, which is like the hot thing at the moment. What you're doing is playing a game and earning tokens in the background for it. So yeah, ahead of the market on this one as well. I think it just has a few flaws that need iterating to the next one. So I think the idea of a reputation system thing and utilizing the rank is definitely a great idea, and we should incorporate that in.
Shift Run Stoppers put a message here. I'll just read it. Maybe if people don't vote or win, their VPower. Maybe if people don't vote / win, their VPower can decay below the initial 100 V all the way to 0. Incentivize people to mint more IDs, and minting IDs equals burning FVT, which equals good tokenomics. Or maybe even allow people to buy VPower, which burns FVT, of course. If their VPower goes all the way to 0, they need to top it back up by burning FVT in order to play again.
Like it. Really good idea. So when I saw this, then you can imagine this being 100, right?
Yeah.
And what you've got to do is it doesn't run way exponentially off forever. What you're doing is keeping your vote power at the maximum, which is it can go down. And yeah, you could, let's say you've just essentially got wrecked your ID down. You could say burn 1,000 FET to ping it back up to the top, and you can start again.
Yeah, and that's your cost to entry.
Yeah, I really like that idea. Yeah, I think we could sketch that out. So one of the things I wanted as an outcome, community to come up with suggestions for each of these components. What should the staking system look like? What should the reputation system look like? What chain should we go next? And I think we long time mooted like what chain next vote, so we could do that. But yeah, there's actually people who now understand this better than I do, because I stopped playing it. Like, I just didn't have the time, like 20 weeks ago. Yeah, UV stopped playing it because he felt like the reputation was given too much of an advantage. It just felt like it was unfair if the person who made the game was rank, so he bailed out. And there's people playing it on BSC, like in a way that I have, like I barely played, but there is a game going on there that I don't know what's going on. It's like it's an interesting phenomenon to have created something, gone into a direction I don't know where it's gone. So I'm super interested in the community insight from the data perspective, and also, now I think Lizzle's in the crowd there somewhere. Liz, do you want to share your report in the markets channel, perhaps, and people can have a look at it. Great. So let's have a quick run through that. Is it in the markets channel?
I actually updated it also a little bit.
No, I think that's opened it on a different window, which is a bit annoying.
I guess maybe one thing that I wanted to ask or touch on is, so we're working on this like nothing at stake issue, and so we changed the game around to incentivize people to actually predict what's going to happen in the market. Is there something in here that we need to consider that would come? Okay, so we changed the incentive structure, so the incentive is you vote better and predict the market. But is there something to be said here that maybe something we also need to be considering is actually like marketing, right? So like maybe a lot of the users here, they don't study these things that well, and so maybe they're just guessing with their heart or intuition. That is there something like maybe we go out and market or try to incentivize people who actually work on this properly and try to get them into the game to get that market alpha? Is that a strategy maybe we should consider?
Absolutely.
And I don't know what that would look like.
So there are people for a while we had a killmen who that respect their insight on the market, understand this stuff, that they TA. I can imagine a scenario where one of our users convinces them to come and set up, and therefore they've brought alpha to the platform by bringing a knowledgeable trader and their knowledgeable community, almost like a kind of referral system. So really good thoughts on that. I agree. I think that there's all right, I have no idea how to predict the future of market, but I think this guy's good at it. I'm going to go and try and persuade him to do it. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's entire groups that are just purely dedicated to, they just have a pot of money and they all just are in a Discord and decide where they should throw the money next.
Yeah, and one of again, if you go and have a look at the original white paper, the sort of dimension to finance.vote, which was social trading, that what you would essentially do is using the markets app, build, like you can have in a WhatsApp group, you and your 10 buds can have I want these 12 tokens. I think these are the 12 tokens that we should buy. And then you're voting on them and you put, and it would go and buy those tokens for you. And you build a collaborative portfolio, which is like where the ultimate end game would end up, a decentralized trading system where you could, with friends, invest in a pot of cryptocurrencies.
That was like at least one of the intentions behind the Woken Next vote, right?
Yeah, it was. It's all about like my thinking is, so trading is a zero-sum game, single player zero-sum game. It's you versus your counterparty. What happens when trading is a non-zero-sum collaborative game? That's what I'm interested in. Instead of it's just me versus the market, us versus, which we saw a bit of in that whole GameStop fiasco at the start of the year, which was like, hold on a minute, what if all these people go and play the market together? So if you're trying to out-trade a whale, they're going to crush you. But if 1,000 people go and try and out-trade a whale, they might have a chance. So that was a big part of the ethos of this thing. And the end game of what I saw this product with is a DAO will need to keep a diverse treasury. So how do you decide what tokens go into the treasury? So I would eventually like us to find on an index type rebalancing system. We've got, say, Ether in our treasury, and we trade Ether for a bunch of tokens from chain, getting us exposure to those chains. And the treasury doesn't just get wrecked in bear markets, it goes up, because we're actively trading the treasury in a safe way, ideally.
Wow. That's I just wanted to say I think that's a really cool idea. I imagine
Look, if we get to that, we've created a decentralized hedge fund. And if you look at our roadmap, the last thing is fund.vote. If we get to that, it's big. Let's just say that.
we've beat the game.
We've beat the game together. More exciting. We've created an entirely new game.
Hey, I'd like to say one thing. There's the tier system you brought up earlier, the idea of having a Premier League. And I was thinking, like, in terms of onboarding new users, it could be stressful and disincentivizing to have such a hardcore, what's the word, like, because you're punishing them if they don't have like good picks. So could there be a tier for intro, like a tier to ease up on some of the new users to give them more time to learn how the voting system would actually work and stuff like that?
It's a really good point, man. So yeah, we could have, so we've got this concept of rank in the markets. We could have one that's like essentially a kind of nothing too much at stake game, where it's pretty similar to what we've got now. There's the kind of the stakes that you're not going to win that much, but you basically can't lose anything either. No, I really like that idea. We should have a kind of beginners game where people can try it out without, risking too much money on it. I like that idea.
Yeah, and you could have it attached to the reputation system, so you could climb through the tiers, right? The intro system, you have to escape the intro system, and then you can go into the intermediate, and then finally onto the Premier League.
Yeah, to entice you in. Yeah, absolutely. Love that idea. So we'd have like these tiered games where in order to even get to that kind of higher table, to have won some of the lower tier games, prove that you're not somebody doesn't know how it works and you're just going to ape all your money in, almost like a training wheels type thing. You know what you're doing if you get to this game. So I'm going to quickly run through this lovely bit of analysis that Lizzle did. So we actually, this is a few weeks back now, but at this snapshot, about 600 IDs, 300 different voters. Our IDs had these, some of them have got this kind of beautiful stuff. This is the share of the total voting power per IDs. So you can see what we've ended up with is, now most financial systems end up with something like this distribution, which is, it's basically a fat-tailed distribution. It's actually not that bad compared to even say like the distribution of Bitcoin, for example. But what we've got here is a few users who have a chunk of the voting power, then this long tail of people who've all got about the same. So ideally what we want is a reputation system that smooths this out to have essentially what they call a better Gini coefficient, where essentially that if votes is money, then the money is more evenly distributed. So yeah, you can see the number of votes, the very early ones, no one really knew about us down here. This is when the game got really gas intensive. And I think this is the impact of having the vote power go up at the end. This is voter turnout with gas costs. So you can see on the Ethereum chain, when gas went to the moon, people stopped voting for obvious reasons because it got super expensive. Now, I did start talking to say that again, sorry? Was that a comment?
No,
or?
I think they just forgot to mute. It's all good.
Okay, just a background thing. So I did have a really interesting, which was, I think we could make Ethereum voting in the vote markets free for gas for the users if the protocol paid it using flash bots, which is the MEV direct to the miners bribing system that's emerged in the arbitrage game. So normally people are bribing miners to get their transactions into the front of the block. Like, I want position 0 in the block because that means that I can win that liquidation in a DeFi system game. I wanted to do, and I actually went and started talking to mining companies. Can I bribe you, make my dApp free? And it's possible, but they were like, why would we bother doing that? Because someone's paying us 100 ETH for a transaction because they make 110 ETH off the trade. Whereas what you're asking us to do is to make a $50 voting fee free. But actually, I ended up speaking to some of the guys who worked at Flashbot, and they actually thought this was super interesting because it makes user dApps usable again on Ethereum. So that might be something I'd like to explore in Markets 2.0, which is essentially, I don't care if it goes to the front of the block, I just want it at the back of the block. And the protocol from the treasury pays for the gas fees for the users to use the dApp. So markets would be free to use on gas costs, which would be, I think, really disruptive. Done as user-facing dApps free to use on Ethereum again.
That's where the identity system is so important, because if you just have it with addresses, you cannot have free gas. Your contract's gonna just
every
with ID
every voter would be costing the protocol because we'd be bribing the miners. Now, if we don't want to be paying for thousands of, we don't want to, but yeah, it's possible using MEV to make dApps free. And I got quite far down the conversations on pick that up. Yeah, a bit more analysis. So average voter used 72% of their vote power. I think this was slightly skewed because some people misunderstood the game and voted like once on something. Their minds were in one person, one vote mode. They hadn't shifted to the quadratic reality yet. And so mistakenly voted with that. So eventually most people started to use most of it. Yeah, so the most common was, which is great, this is like most voting, and eventually used more once they gained the extra reputation. You can see the different kinds of votes. What was interesting about it was the more tokens you voted on, the more gas intensive it was. Because the way the contract works, there's a little loop in there. If you vote on 5, gas is linear in it. Every new token you added, you paid more gas on it. So the most common vote was 10 because people wanted to get a vote in, but didn't want to spend the extra gas on spending it across multiple tokens.
So this is interesting, right? Because this almost inadvertently solved the nothing at stake issue because gas was so expensive. So
It did on the Ethereum chain, yeah, because there was something at stake. You're losing your gas on it. Whereas on BSC, it was practically free, and consequently, Sybil attacked a lot more. So I'd look. One of the things that we're going to try and do is get the data for BSC and run this exact same analysis again on there and see if this was different. But there's something super interesting here. That this vote configuration seems to be a Schelling point, as does this one, which means that for some reason that this felt like either someone was doing the same vote every week in, week out, or that this is a kind of like natural configuration of quadratic voting. Our top 3 voters, ID 50, ID 5, and ID 15. Who you can see our top one here had 5,000 V. It's exponential. It's got this where it's going to the moon, and that's the voting power. To the point where this winner, this person, maybe in the crowd, takes the pot every week. It's essentially the pot is going to these 3 players. So I think we basically just need to call an end to version 1 because the game is essentially over. And I think what's happening is that the votes that are in the pot at the moment are 3 or 4 players battling each other out. There's like this weird dystopian, there can be only one sort of end game to this.
Those guys are not going to be happy if it ends.
But they're not going to be happy if we turn it off because they're collecting free money for against each other. You can't run a protocol for 3 people, you know.
It also would be interesting to see if they're dumping it immediately, if they're putting it into yield, where do this liquidity mine tokens go?
Yeah. I'm open to if there's a way to gracefully retire this game, or would you be happy? They've spent a long time accruing this voting power. I think there's a way to. So the identities, I think we want to. Those initial identities are still special and always will be, and always will have a system. So I want this reputation to mean something in the future, even if this game retires. Ultimately, if we change the reputation system, for example, these are going to be super rare NFTs, this being the most rare out of all of them.
I think it's the amount of IDs, right? Address.
It's top 3 wallets. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the amount of voter IDs they have, not the number. I have another one. If you scroll down, you will see the top 3
earners. Yeah. Yeah. So this is like this person bought 5 IDs. Most successful voters participate in these rounds. Yeah. So this one used 48 different combinations. I think there's one. Yeah, but what's interesting, so essentially we'll be able to infer from these people what their favorite tokens are and things like that as well, which could be quite interesting. But yeah, this is a lovely bit of analysis, and I think we can repeat the same analysis on BSC, and I think now we've got the new scripts that we can essentially infer a lot more interesting data from that. So Liz, have you got the stuff that you think you...
Yeah, I started working on it actually. I started working with Team Dashboard, and now after the workshop yesterday, I will look into the Python code also, and then try to make exactly the same presentation for the BSC data.
Excellent. So yeah, I'm going to have to run off in a minute, but any final thoughts or comments on anything we're working on here? Would people be interested in getting involved in the... We've already had some like cracking suggestions of where we can go next on this call. I think the next step is I'm going to share this CryptoPad document, and anyone who's interested in working on the next iterations of this, add yourself as a handle on the contributors bucket, and we'll continue to work on it in the markets channel. And what I really want is the markets 2.0 to be genuinely, we've all made it together, rather than we run off and create a new iteration without consulting anyone like that. Yeah, I'm looking forward to working on this, everyone. I think this is a nice thing to get our proposal system going with, build out our governance systems on it. And eventually what we might have is, here's 4 or 5, or maybe there's 6 or 7 different proposals, and then we vote on which one we think is the best version to run with first.